I just want to start by emphasizing what Bazaar said. I'm not an urban planner. I'm not an architect. My understanding of cities in general is evolving, right? So for me, this is as much an opportunity to learn as much as to share. So there are not going to be any breathtaking insights on urban design that you're going to get out of the session or planning. But what I do hope to share with you is a perspective around how we look at cities and how we look at social problems in general. Yeah. Just a very quick introduction. This organization that you see at the center called Sattva is the organization that I founded. It's a consulting organization with an exclusive focus on impact and sustainability. So that's not our 10% of our P&L, that is our P&L, what we do. And we are a private limited company. So when we started back in 2009, the idea of a private limited organization solving exclusively for impact was to put it mildly, an oxymoron for a lot of people, right? Which is that how do you even make that happen? So a lot of our initial requests were about, can you help me plant my trees? Can you help distribute the t-shirts and so on? I think it's safe to some of these people that you see here are people that we work with today. But the reason I put this slide is really that it speaks to the idea of Samaj, Sarkar, Bazaar today. When we started Sattva, we, as founders, we said, what are the two principles on which we'll found the organization? The one principle we said is that strategy is necessary but far from sufficient. Everybody has a plan on how to create change in the society. Like I keep joking that my mom has plans for everything, right? She goes to the north and she says, you should just put lights everywhere, it'll be safe. And I'm like, yeah, sure. But the making of that, making the strategy to action is actually where the great difficulty is. So we said, as an organization, we'll never stop at strategy. So today, if you look at it, 70% of all Sattva's revenue come from projects where we are accountable for outcomes. And that has kept us grounded and more humble about how difficult some of these problems are, which typically a consultant starts to gloss over. The second is we are a multi-sector, multi-stakeholder organization by design. Because when we started working in the impact space, there was the education group, there was a health group, there was the environment group, etc. And they often might work in the same community and not talk to each other. Like the person talking to a mother about antenatal care will not talk to the mother about Anganwadi workers providing early childhood education, because it's a health problem, not an education problem. But more and more in the world we live in, I think problems are more interconnected. I don't think you can draw a line now and say this is a health problem or an education problem. I think they are interconnected. And two, we realize that to solve problems, you will really have to bring all stakeholders together. So the logo that you see here, which is very small here, hopefully we'll blow it up, is actually a tangram of smaller pieces. And the idea is that we bring all those pieces together to make solutions happen. And so these logos that you see here is a function of us having worked with diverse stakeholders. So when I say we should work with Samaj, Sarkar and Bazaar, it's not just a topic for a talk, it is what we do. It is what we solve for every single day. Yeah. I often define myself this way. I have three roles that I play. One is, and the primary one is really of an entrepreneur. As a person starting a company, building an institution that can outlive my ability and my presence is really an ongoing pursuit. I don't know if any of you have ever tried starting anything on your own. It's the dumbest thing. It's super painful, it's extremely frustrating on a day-to-day basis, it's super hard. But it's one of those things where I think Charlie Chaplin supposedly said, every day is a tragedy, but a year seems like a comedy, right? So you take a decadal view to it, it feels like, wow, I've done a lot, but on a day-to-day basis, it's a frustrating thing. But that really has shaped who I am. The second part of the work I do is what I call consultant, where I have the absolute honor and the luck to be able to work with very, very inspiring organizations. People who actually impact, sectors across health, education, urban, gender, livelihoods, etc. And leaders across governments, civil society, industry, and so on. Just to give you a sense of it, in the last 3 days, one day I worked with an organization that works on urban spaces and cities to see what thriving cities will mean. The second day, I was actually in a meeting with the board of a large corporate, helping them think about what can they do in education. The third day, I'm actually in Niti Aayog, helping think about what do we do to improve knowledge infrastructure in the country. And honestly, I don't say this for bragging rights. I just genuinely say this out of my sheer dumb luck that I've been able to work across all of these stakeholders, because it tells you what the constraints of all of these people are in creating impact. And the last part of the work I do is essentially what I call as a student, which is to really understand how to solve some of these problems. I run a podcast called Decoding Impact, where every fortnight we call a fairly important person in the sector from a practitioner point of view. So there are no funders, there are no thought leaders, but essentially people are practitioners to come and explain why it is hard to solve a problem and what can be done to make that better, right? So that part of the work, and today's talk essentially is in that student bucket. It's not where I'm being a consultant, it's not where I'm being an entrepreneur, it's to share with you what I'm learning. Just in terms of my city's work, I work with this organization called World Resources Institute for the last 5 years as part of their cities program. So some understanding comes from there. I'm also on the board of an organization called Aga Khan Agency for Habitat, which essentially looks at habitat, and again, some learnings from there as well, but really far, far from what all of you know about cities. Just 2 rules for today's session to make it useful. One, I know it is Saturday morning, but this session will be far less useful for all of us if you keep quiet and be passive. So my request is, however provocative your thoughts are, it will be good to make it interactive. So I don't have a question in the end. I literally have a question at every slide. So it will be great to have participation and provocative points of view, right? Number one. And number two, let's ensure that we bring in all the questions. Some we might be able to answer, some we might not, but at least ensuring that there is healthy dialogue will be very, very important. Yeah. The first question that I had for all of you, right? What would a thriving city actually look like? By the way, since I'm trying to be contemporary, I actually asked generative AI to print an image of what thriving cities would look like. That image on the right is actually what AI thinks thriving cities will look like. But if I had to ask you, what will a thriving city actually look like? An observable way in which you say, this is a thriving city. It's not a rhetorical question. Yeah? Congestion will show us, because density helps us solve problems much easier. So congestion would be one. What else? Good public transport, the ability to move. By the way, I work in mobility, so I completely relate to what you're saying. Yeah. And I come from Bangalore. So anything else? Markets, but tell me about observably. What about markets?
Hustling and bustling. So some kind of engagement happening.
So markets find that space as a great place to thrive, right? Thriving commercial activity.
Interaction. So something like where too much of interaction happening. So that is when we call a city, because till a certain density or an intensity, interaction happens in rural areas, but the moment it extends to a certain limit, that is when we call it an urban.
Correct. I mean, and the word I typically use is network effects, right? Which is when that gets to a point where it just becomes exponential rather than the.
Yeah. What else? Specialization.
Like what?
So people are involved in different kind of professions, different kind of services, especially.
And is the diversity that you're interested in, or the diversity of specialization? Absolutely. What else? And think about citizens. How would citizens experience a thriving city?
Vibrant public spaces.
So Vibrant public spaces. Extremely important. Yeah.
Possibilities of scale. For everyone, there is something.
So any person in the city has something to sort of receive from the city. So there is that ability. Okay. What else?
Pollution.
Pollution is higher low. Both sides. Pollution as a sign of economic activity, but pollution also being livable, I guess.
Few apartments without legs.
As a Bangalorean, I can totally. I mean, the numbers are staggering, right? We are down to 17 now. We had 135. And every year we lose one. But yeah, Lakeview apartments, vistas, all of the metaphors of good living, just in names of apartments. Affordability, and I think for me that comes to quality of life at an affordable price for anyone, right? But one of the things, I grew up in Chennai, and I always used to love at Chennai is at any price you get good food, right? And it's an amazing quality about Chennai, and you might not actually find it as much in other cities, especially in the north. Mumbai has its version, but Chennai had best food at every rate, and that's amazing. Okay, what else?
Access to services. Your banking, your hospitals, everything. Your water, sanitation.
Absolutely. Online services, offline services, just quality of life being better. And I think one thing I'm not hearing is cultural spaces, right? I think one of the things that is so critical, and again, I grew up in Chennai, then I went to Bangalore, and the difference is, you know the feeling of living in a 600-year-old city versus a 100-year-old city. And when you go to Bombay in the town side to the new side, you see a difference, right? And the point I want to make is, thriving cities are so many things now. They are hubs of economic activity. A lot of you talked about diversity of specialization, economic and thriving behavior. They are cultural spaces. They carry a certain thread of what people feel enriches their life, like watching a painting on a wall. You can't quantify it, but you know it enriches your life, right? They are spaces to live. So quality of life, lesser pollution, access to facilities, all of that is important. They are hubs of talent, right? One of the biggest challenges in building new cities is how do you get the talent to come, right? Like earlier in the morning, he was talking about how starting a pharmaceutical school here created the entire generics business in Ahmedabad. It's becoming increasingly harder to build that virtuous cycle where talent comes and then creates space. There's actually an interesting paper on what they call economics of geography, right? Which is saying, how do you create this economic geography idea? Saying, create a space where economic activity thrives because the way geography is designed.
It also has like multiple political ideologies and theological concepts, because there cannot be a monotonous city. A city is somewhere where a different group of people will come together, and it will have that kind of variation of ideologies and variation in terms of politics.
Absolutely. And I think the point you want to highlight there, which I think is important, is dialogue. The spirit of dialogue is extremely critical, right? So you had a hand.
Two things I think we need to consider. Three things. One, that historically cities have been the center for the imagination of crime. And I think when we think of the city, that's something that we don't think of.
Yeah.
And thriving city is also a thriving criminal enterprise. Yeah. That's number one. Number two, over the last 150 years, what we call modern violence is also rooted in urban areas. And we need to contend with the fact that a thriving city will also have innovative ways of hurting people. Yeah. And third, city by definition has to be a multi-layered space. So you can't have a monolith. Yeah. And I think the older cities versus the new city, the language part is something that we need to do. The great metropolis is actually the best place to study business.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought up the crime part, because for everything we do, there is a shadow side to what, in any system, not just in the system of cities, in any system, and contending with the shadow side. And I remember one of those days where I landed at Mumbai, and I think Panolnaka or wherever, that space, this 6-lane highway, right? Like literally in the middle of the city where you can go. And I was working with a non-profit, and they took me into one road, one little gully, and I couldn't hold my bag on the side. I had to hold my bag in the front because they didn't have space. And the houses on both sides of the streets were actually sharing things literally by stretching their hand. In an instant, you felt like you're in a different city. It's like, it's like Harry Potter, right? And now you're sort of in a different place, in Diagon Alley, and then suddenly everything looks different. Cities are, in some sense, so many things. So cities are hubs of economic activity. Cities are living spaces. Cities are cultural spaces. Cities are spaces of dialogue and intellectual activity. Cities are ecological hotspots, by the way, right? I mean, Bangalore at least used to be, right? We had so many migratory birds that actually used to come to Bangalore in some of our lakes and then go back. We were part of their roots in some form. Mumbai has its own history of ecological hotspots, that's, mangroves and all of that. So then the question that sort of comes to us is, who holds this vision, the full vision of a thriving city? If cities are so many things, who holds this full vision of a thriving city? Because suddenly you are now talking about something that's so many things. Who holds it? Government and citizens.
It will be never a complete singular vision. Everyone will be having their own vision of the city, and that in turn will be culminating into something, to the character of the city.
Correct. Okay. Anyone else? you're right, but I have a follow-up question to that. And if you don't mind with some of you, there are some chairs, if you can't come in the front, or you have to be really loud.
A thriving city would also be a city that is not thinking in terms of binaries, not just in terms of gender, age, but holistically. So there won't be a singular identity that one person will hold on to. There will be different parcels of things that would have to come together and combine together to become.
Diversity is a feature part.
And I also say that there will be conflicting vision also. So one vision will be, so cities are actually places of conflicts and acts. So there will be, visions will be colliding and somehow shaping into something else.
I do want to use the board at some point. But then again, coming back to the question that I asked, who holds the full vision of a thriving city?
No.
No. Firefight. Great question, great point. I want to then lead that to the next question. By the way, all these three images what Google told me thriving cities look like, which I think is the nature of where we are going.
So I just want to ask one question, that if there is no singular vision of the city, then why do we need leadership?
It's a great question. And that sort of begs us to ask the question, what is leadership?
Actually, then managing the visions?
That question is extremely critical, right? So let me ask a different question, right? All of you, when you talk about ideal states, right? All of us, in ideal state in anything, right? Like all of us have a view of an ideal state which goes like this, which is I'm in a bad state, right? And I get to a slightly better state. And then I go to here, here, and then this is the ideal state. So I reach an ideal state, and then I stay in the ideal state, right? So whenever people say in Hindu philosophy or theology, they talk about nirvana, this is the imagination we have, right? You are a person who's stuck in the material limitations, you give up, you land here. Is this correct? Is this how ideal states work? It's not a straight line, so maybe it's a curve. Like this?
It is about the perception of it. Like, if I perceive the ideal state as I would, if I think I am ideal now, they won't.
Yeah, but then you're only saying that as a person I'm here. That's all. You're already ideal, but anyone less than ideal, you will see down only, no? So that way it's still a line. Right? Correct. This is Maslow's theory, right? Now the reason I'm bringing this up, and this is not just a general philosophical tangent, is actually in the Hindu philosophy, they say that ideal states are like this, right? Which means you never stay in the ideal state for a long time. Nirvana is not about being in nirvana constantly. Nirvana is the ability to get back to nirvana easily. And the reason this is important when we talk about what is leadership, our view of leadership is that there is a leader who's going to take us to here. Doesn't happen, right? Systems constantly evolve. They move this way, they move this way, and people act on their own minds. And the leader is sort of facilitating the system to get to that ideal place, right? And the word facilitation, I think, is a very, very important detail, right? But we'll come to that. That's a little part of what I want to talk about later. But come back to this question. Who is responsible for making cities thrive? And again, don't virtue signal to this answer. In the sense that you are all thinking about what is the correct answer to give in this room. You genuinely, if you ask this question today, to how you've thought about this question, on whom do you put the accountability of making a city thrive? If it has to be one person. There isn't anyone. So it's sort of, in some sense we say, this is what we get. Isme adjust kar lete hain, right? The mayor. So in some sense the government, the administration. Because, and that's possible by the way, right? When you go to the city and something is broken, the first instinct is to say, Sarkar ko kuch to karna hai iske baare mein. Right? Sarkar kya kar rahi hai? Tax le rahi hai humse, kuch nahi kar rahi hai. Hum kisko paisa de rahe hain? Like this whole Ashneet Grover driver that he did, right? Where he said, you're taking so much money from me, you're not doing anything. This is, and to say that the government has the final accountability of doing this, right? Anybody else? Yes. Institutions, such as?
Just it's, give me two minutes. I think the way Ahmedabad imagined itself in the last 100 years, not just for itself but for the country and for the creation of knowledge, problem solving, and collaboration of points of recourse, points of activity, being supported both by civil society, the market, and the state. That creates an institutional repository of the kind that no organization or an individual can either be given that power or can acquire.
Absolutely. And I think the point you made about institutions is very, very important. I want to come back to that at a later point. But again, independent of that answer, in your mind, when you go to a city and when you find something not thriving, who do you sort of look up to and say they are responsible for solving it?
People, because they are the ones who are doing the interaction. They are the ones who are making the speak point, these are Samaj or Sarkar.
So people, essentially.
People themselves, they are the ones who make the different tools, interfacing and relating each other.
Absolutely. Anybody else? Anybody else? And the reason I'm spending time on this question, because I only have 10 slides. The reason I'm spending time on this question is because acknowledging how we see who's accountable is at the center of how we act to solve this problem. And in general, when I ask this question in larger groups, a predominant part of them often believe government is responsible for making a city. And in some sense, what they say is that government it has to create the enablement framework for everybody to participate. In some sense, they believe that government has the provider of good quality of life, because they say, hey, you are the provider of good quality of life. Right? We also believe that government is the most trustworthy, non-agenda based stakeholder that can offer this. Now, as I say this, some of you are smiling, but if I repeat the same sentence with market, you will completely disagree with me. Just say market is the most agenda-less way to do this, because we believe government works for the benefit of the people, and hence we can trust them more. And I think they are in the ideal quadrant of intent and power. So if you draw a 2x2 matrix of intent and power, right? And if you disagree with me, you should tell me now. This is intent, good intent, and this is power. We say that citizens have high good intent, low power. Business has high power, low good intent. And government has high power, high good intent. This is the Indian mental model. This is the Indian mental model at large, because we are the only country that will trust all our financial data with the government and build something called UPI. That's true, by the way. It's very hard to repeat UPI in Europe. They'll say, who are you as government to hold my financial data in a way that you will just tell me that you will treat it well? You're okay with Digi Yatra in our airports and say, you can just scan my face. I have no problem. Right? America would be like, what are you doing? Right? I have surveillance issues in this. And by the way, compared to Africa, where the state is dysfunctional, is actually a benefit, because for us, it helps us trust somebody. There's a Bertelsmann index, which actually says who we trust in the system. Government ranks very highly in India, right? Even if it is just a person or the larger government, that is the Indian mental model. We don't trust the business because we think they're too powerful. We don't trust the citizens because we don't understand the value of compounding. But we trust the government because we believe they have good intent and good action. Because of which, a lot of times, coming back to his question of leadership, we have the mental model of man of the system. Have you heard of the man of the system? The phrase man of the system? It actually was articulated by Adam Smith when he talked about economics. He said that there are people who believe that society can be arranged like a chessboard, where you place people to do things and they will, as intended, do those things. You'll say business should act like this, society should act like this, government should act like this, and you believe that people will follow the rules and act, and people design this system and then say, aisa karo. The truth is, there is no chessboard, there are no rules, everybody acts randomly. So there is no central control system that exists, right? governments, when you make them the center apex structure, make things like this. So going back to make responsive, why am I asking this question? Is that if we truly believe that governments will take the leadership in making cities thrive, we expect a central planning structure where we design it and hope that people fit into that structure. Going back to what we talked about, thriving cities, cities are far more complex, far more organic, far more thriving for any one stakeholder to be able to solve that challenge. Does that make sense? Yeah? And I think one of the things that we have to recognize is unless communities, businesses, and governments come together to solve the challenge, we'll never be able to make a city thrive. सहमत हो आप सब? Anyone who's not सहमत here? Yeah? I mean, I know it's easier said than done. Some of the nuances are very, very complicated, but let's talk about them as we go. Right? This is the last slide on more as a question, then I'll come down to other things. There are typically 4 roles that people will play, right? One is what I call the doer. Doer is the one who gets things done in the city, right? Like, I construct the buildings, I do all of that. Payer is the one who pays for it, right? Influencer is the one who decides what gets done without the authority of deciding what gets done. They don't have any system authority, but they can actually influence what gets done. Regulator is the one who makes sure that the systems, policies, SOPs, practices are all set up, right? If I had to ask you, where does government come into this quadrant today? Huh? Regulator and doer, not payer? It is the payer. So, government can be influencer, payer, regulator, doer, etc. I will in a bit. Where does society, community, Samaj come in? Like individual citizens, where do they come? We are payer and influencer. Okay. In a self-regulated system, we could be a regulator as well, doer as well. Yeah, okay. Then a final question, Bazaar, and I'll come back. Where does Bazaar come in this? Where would Bazaar actually play a role? Now, I think we've all wisened up now, right? But the point is, they're all playing everywhere. And I'll tell you what I mean by this. If you look at communities are actually doers. There are places where communities take an over to building infrastructure. Like, the whole Manrega scheme, for example, in rural India is essentially assuming the citizens build their own infrastructure, maintain their own infrastructure, run their own infrastructure, right? And finally, the people that are doing the work, contractors, etc., right? Like the workers, they're all citizens. And they have a certain role to play. And if you look at regulators, RWAs today are designed to regulate at least a certain level of behavior within their communities, etc., right? There are places, for example, where citizens definitely pay for their own infrastructure. We all pay taxes, and there is a certain influence that comes with that. But we also, in addition, contribute. And finally, citizens actually deeply influence what gets done. The agenda influencing significantly happens through citizens. Of course, one amplification channel for us is media, because media then enables us to reach more people. But there are far higher citizen movements that have shaped the way cities work than we can actually imagine, right? Now, the problem with imagining, the imagination problem with imagining Samaj is we imagine a Samaj as a group of individuals, right? Is a community equal to 100 people? No, not a rhetorical question again. Is a community equal to 100 people? Like I have 100 people. Like if you're a group, are you just the sum total of individual people? Why not? Let's say if all of you wanted something individually, versus you as a group wanting something, what is different? Why? Influence. Huh? Interests? Influence? Right? There is a power of compounding. Right? Huh? Capacity, and that comes from influence as well, right? Which is when two people want something, it is not just that two individual people want something, suddenly that becomes a collective voice. And many times we don't understand the value of what people in finance also call compounding, which is, let's say if one person wants it, 100% wants it, the equation is not like this, the equation is actually like this, right? Suddenly goes much stronger. Suddenly 3 people is a crowd, 10 people is a movement, right? So that is one challenge, because we play everywhere. Bazaar, by the way, markets play everywhere. We were just discussing before the session. We don't engage with developers today as urban planners and as just the body that thinks about what city should be, because we're like, developers are too corrupt. They don't सुनते ही नहीं है, उनको जो करना है करते हैं. So we will not include them. We'll make a plan, but we underestimate the subversion capabilities of developers. They have far higher subversive capabilities than any of us. They will anyway get things done. Today, the reality, the real estate market shapes the city, right? The reason we have lake vistas without lakes in Bangalore is fundamentally a market problem, right? We practically just build everywhere with very poor regulation. So essentially, markets again pay everywhere, and I have a more detailed slide I'll share with you, which just lists down everybody in all of these blocks, etc. But what it also shows you is that the number of stakeholders that are involved in cities in all of these 4 roles are very different and very diverse. And I think bringing all of them together, I think, is very important. Yeah. This is an interesting question. How many of you truly believe that markets work for the interest of the city? Raise your hand. Interest of the city. The city, like we talked about thriving cities, right? How many people believe that markets actually work in the interest of the thriving city? Yeah? Some of you are, some of you are not. For those of you who are not, why are they not working in the interest of a thriving city? And I've given you 4 options. One is they have a capacity problem, which is that they don't have the skills, capabilities. They don't understand urban planning. They didn't go to CEPT University. So they don't get it, right? Could be one. Second is they don't have the incentive. Why would they do it, right? Mera kaam, mera dhanda. Running a business is so hard. Why would I worry about the city? Third is there are just no rules and structures to enable it, right? So they don't work with it. Or 4, they just don't have the intent. They're like, listen, nahi karna yaar. Why should I do it? City takes care of itself. I'll take care of myself. That's the problem.
So I just have one question, like the previous example that you took of the development market, where there are certain kind of clear hierarchies which are being established, monopolies or whatever it is. So that is when I don't think it works for the city, and then it works maybe for certain individuals. If the market is open, definitely yes. But any kind.
Can I ask you a follow-up question? How much of the Indian construction market do you believe is actually high-rises? And not even talking infrastructure. Infrastructure is total, like roads and all. Just the commercial housing market, multi-story building high-rises, what percentage of construction is actually there? Roughly. Like 50%, 30%. How much monopoly? Because high-rises is where monopolies exist, right? How much do you think is that the part of the market?
70%,
right? Let's say hospitals, right? How much of the hospitals do you think are actually some of those organized hospitals in India, which are multi-bed, more than 10 beds, for example? How many do you think, roughly? In India, right, even if you take just urban, peri-urban, I'm not even talking rural, what percentage of hospitals in India are actually more than 10 beds hospitals? 5%, 25%, anyone else? 20%? So, only 11% of all construction of housing in India is actually multi-story. So, the Bazaar is not Hiranandani. The Bazaar is a long tail of people. 9% of all the hospitals in India have more than 10 beds. 9%. So, Vedanta, Manipal, Apollo, sab milke, like, less than 9%. So, I work with a federation of gynecologists. It's just mom and pop shops, yeah. They all have 1 hospital, 2 hospitals, 3 clinics. And their elections are even harder than our current elections, by the way. They do national tours. I mean, I'm serious. To win the president of the gynecologist department, it's a matter of prestige. They travel across the country, spend money, build alliances, etc. because they're such diverse groups. It's not like you convince 4 people you'll become a president. Credai, for example, is just a long tail of developers, by the way. Which means our our imagination of market is the big players because they have so much more media attention. Markets are a lot more diverse, right? No construction company today can enforce quality and employee well-being, as in construction worker well-being, in their value chain. They materially are unable to do it. They're like, yeah, the contractor is more powerful than me. I can only say so much. So we worked on a project where we said construction worker has to be paid on time. He's like, I can't do anything about it. Because I've given that guy a job, he's going to do it. You can talk to him and get him to pay. So our belief in the central power of the market is actually much lesser than what it truly is. Right? And the reason these 4 things are listed here, they are not our bid. There is a framework called the Donella Meadows framework on systems thinking. And where they often say that these are the 4 levels in which people typically work, which is 1 is capacity, that I don't know the skills. The second is incentive. Third is rules and structures. 4th is intent. And a lot of the times we work at the capacity level. I'll train you to do this better. We'll go to a contractor and say, you don't know how to do this, I'll train you to do this better, because we believe that there's a skill gap problem. 90% of the time, it's not. If they have the right incentives, they will do the right thing. If they had the right rules and structures, they will do the right thing. And if the society really believes that's the right thing to do, they will do the right thing. And oftentimes, the challenges are not on the bottom, the challenges are on the top. Right? Same question to community. Why don't communities engage more actively in shaping cities? And give me an honest answer. We all agree that communities today in India are not shaping cities to be thriving cities, right? We are more passive. We receive the city we get. We don't shape the city we want to get. Why? Huh? Incentives? Okay, what else?
It's also the relationship of city and the citizen. Most of the last few years, most of us are not living in that area since like 20, 30 years, like our parents used to. So there's no relationship between the citizen and the city. It's a transaction.
It's a transactional relationship, and by the way, I don't think any citizen today has the intent or the belief that they can actually shape the city.
It's not just that, it's also the perspective. There's no top view. Nobody knows what's happening. One individual at a time, one house and what are they doing and what are the repercussions.
But can I challenge you on that argument? Do you really believe that everybody should have the top-down view for them to be able to contribute to shaping a city?
Not the top down, guys, the top view.
The top view. Let's say, do they even want the top view to shape a city?
No, I think you need to know what you are the part, you need to know what's the relation.
So one suggestion for us to sort of think about is that in a very complex system, the question that I asked earlier, right? Who has a full view of the city? That's how open systems work. No one has a full view of the city. So the idea of the top view does not exist, right? And so, a lot of us work in closed systems. Closed systems are organizations where Bazaar, for example, has a lot of control. He can shape the organization because he has the apex view. I was trying to make you sound more powerful there, right? So you do believe that, hey, listen, at a certain level you can shape it. You can sort of define the boundary. You can see, in a closed system, you can decide who enters and who exits, right? Like who can intercept, at least when you had the fences. You can decide on who enters, who exits. You can decide what is good behavior. Like you can enforce good behavior, right? Saying you can't wear this, do this, whatever. In an open system, you cannot control who enters. There is no boundary to the system, right? Like who decides who enters a city today? I mean, theoretically you can talk about it, but you can't. You can't define good behavior across the entire group. You can say, don't do this, which is the minimum legal norm, but what is good behavior can be defined. And you can't define how people interact with each other. So in closed systems, interactions are controlled. The teacher teaches a student applies for grades. You have interactions defined. Open systems have no interactions defined. So to your point, the top view is an illusion. And if I can be provocative, urban planners believe there is a top. Right? They wish. And it's like how engineers love prototypes, right? If I can draw it on a sheet, it exists. Right? And urban planners do have that belief that cities are two-dimensional and you can actually put that in a plan and the plan will execute. And now I'll go back to man of the system. You believe there is a system. The point is cities are open systems. They don't have boundaries. They don't have rules. you will have to constantly do what we call influence without authority, right? Which is create incentives for people to do the right thing, and that's the magic of why cities thrive. Cities don't thrive by enforcing rules. Cities thrive by enabling the right incentives, the right structures for people to do the right thing, right? There are examples, by the way, of how this has happened in the past. It's not like it cannot, right? Like what happened in Silicon Valley is an example of how you created a thriving system where innovation suddenly became important. Florence was an example. Bombay is an example of just Bangalore, right? Bangalore just created a certain academic excellence and a certain innovation. Now, every coffee shop, somebody is discussing valuation, right? In Bombay, why don't most of the time drivers and taxi drivers in Bombay not haggle with you on the price while they do that in Chennai? Because Danda, why straight, just do it, be efficient and move on. Why is there a certain discipline on who gets a seat in the train? Like, who defined that rule? There is a certain culture that cities form, and it's not like government put a rule, right? So I'm going back to the same point that I mentioned, that just to quickly summarize before we go down to the next part of this discussion. So we started by saying, what is a thriving city? And we said that a thriving city is one where economic activity, cultural spaces, dialogue, intellectual activity, quality of life, ecological hotspots, all of that have to happen together. And who holds the full view of the city? No one, because it is too complex for any one person to hold. Who is responsible for making a city thrive? We work with the mental model of government being responsible for it. Government does have a role, but has a role. Does not have the role to make it happen. And unless we co-opt the markets and citizens to be able to be part of that conversation, it becomes harder and to be able to actually do this. Now, how do we do this? We don't do this by doing top-down rules, but we do this by creating incentives for everybody to be part of that conversation. Yeah? Make sense? Is everyone with me so far? Okay. So let's move on to the next slide. Why doesn't it happen? If all of this is, see, nothing that I told you today is new, right? ऐसा नहीं है कि मैंने like I blew your mind and said, मुझे कभी नहीं पता था ये सब, right? You're basically saying, yeah, man, absolutely, it's right and so on. Maybe you've got like there's a little bit of a rustiness that got shaken off, but nothing is new. But what is the problem? The problem is the hourglass, right? Hand to heart, how many of you here have ideas on what government should do better? Such batao. So all of you have to raise your hand with honesty, right? We all have ideas on what government should do better, right? At least once a day, one idea, 100 ideas. Especially if 3 people come together, it's like, and I was born in Kerala. It's amazing. It's a culture. Just sit together and say what government should do, right? That is my job. What is your job description? I'll tell the government what to do, right? That is my job. I don't do anything else, right? The woman in the house is working. I have tea and tell people what to do. So, but why doesn't government do all that? Right? Go to the stage. So essentially what happens is, there is a lot of ideas that are here, right? Which is what we think the government should do. And I've worked with the government, and I actually think there are a lot of well-intentioned people in the government who want to do the right thing. There is that straight line shoot that we will do saying, yaar, sab corrupt hai, kaam nahi karna hai. It is, I can tell you, the IAS officers are among the most hard-working, smart, politically aware people I've met, right? I've never met a dumb IAS officer, right? Saying, yaar, isko kuch nahi pata, kaise baitha hai Sarkar pe. Never met him, not once, right? Now, their intentions, their ability, all of that, never, their intentions are high, and 90% of the time they're asking us what is the right thing to do. Now, the problem is that what we know is what we want. What they know is what they can do. And there is a narrow spindle where that our idea has to become something that is actually executable by the government. Right? And that often is much harder than we can imagine. Right? Because we don't understand the constraints of the government. Right? I'll give you an example. Real life. Right? I live close to the lake in Bangalore which keeps frothing and is famous on national television. Some of you must have seen it. It's called the Bellandur Lake. Right? Now, the reason Bellandur Lake froths is for many reasons. It's shrinking every day, etc. And I, as a community group, actually want to save it. And I've realized that there is this one thing that we have to do, where we just have to connect the two lakes so that there is a water flow, etc. It creates ecology. It will work. Science apparently says it is true. It's very clear that that's what has to be done. Let's say I go to a corporate, right, and tell the corporate that here is a proposal. I just need 50 lakhs. We have the engineers, we have the system, we have to get this done. Now, as part of the CSR budget of the company should ideally spend that 50 lakhs, right? Now, the CSR head is completely convinced about this and is actually sitting in the room and saying, great opportunity to create massive ecological, economical, social impact. We should do this. In the same room are 4 other people, okay? There is the CFO, the Chief Financial Officer, and I don't know how many of you know this. If the CSR budget does not get spent within the year, the CFO has to report to the government as to why. And there is actually a clause that says you can go to jail if you don't provide adequate reasons. The CFO is saying, yeah, sounds like a great idea, but is this something where adequate money will be spent on time? Because we can't have unspent money. This seems dangerous. Government can come and say, no, what will I do, right? There is a HR person who's saying, listen, our CSR is a great opportunity for engaging our employees. You do this engineering work of making a canal, what will employees do? Can we just clean the lake, right? Along with this. And the CSR is like, clean karke kya fayda? Nahi karna hai, right? But the HR was like, but if the employees are not engaged, they will not even know that we were part of this, right? There is a marketing and branding person, right, who's thinking, listen, this is reality, the construction market and the reality of real estate does not want this to happen. They can easily create another campaign as to why companies shouldn't intervene in this. We don't even know what we are dealing with. Too risky, right? Like it's like saying take a problem that you not even have to solve and get into the trouble because we are an IT company. Why are we getting involved in some construction activity? We don't even know what we know. Right? Then there is a company secretary, right, who is basically saying, "Kaun karne wala hai? ATG hai kya? 12A hai kya? FCRA hai kya? Is this international money? Is this a private limited company? Can we give CSR money to a private limited company, etc." Real conversation, right? As a CEO, you're sitting in the room. Who should you listen to? Actual question. You are the CEO. You listen to all the voices. You heard the company secretary, you heard the CFO, you heard the marketing head, you heard the HR head, you heard the CSR. Who should you listen to? There is no wrong answer, so you can tell me what you think. Genuine, whatever comes to your mind.
You have to put one person in charge and charge them with solving everybody else's problems so that we can move forward.
Absolutely. Well, any other ideas?
So in this case, let's say I'm a socially conscious organization, definitely want to create long-term impact. Who should I listen to?
The CSR head, right? Because he's saying this is the right. What else?
The CEO, well, let's assume the CEO is a rational person who's looking at the interest of the company, right? Let's forget the fact that it might be an individual tendency. What if you were that? What will you do? Forget somebody imaginary CEO. You are the CEO. What will you do?
This is affecting the society. This is affecting me.
But you are the decision maker of the organization. So you can't take a me argument here.
This is the organization
Benefiting from this. But everybody is giving you reasons why or why not. So what will you do? You can't give me theory. You have to give me a choice.
So you start doing like numbers for arguments. Like if there is a risk, then what is the time period exactly? And you try to quantify.
But you will have to then reconcile all of these points of view.
So it has to be driven by the evidence. Because by the principle. A chosen principle is chosen. So actions have to be on that. The people have to be guided by those actions are personal.
Preferences, etc. Correct. So hence what let's assume this organization like the Tatas, for example. What will they do? What would they do in this situation? Should they go ahead and drill that thing and get it done? Should they not do it? What should they do? As a CEO, you're in that meeting, you are tasked with a decision. You can't say, let's meet again. whatever, right? You have to take a call. You have to give some course of action. As leaders, what will you do?
So currently, that means you are competing with the government. The government should connect it.
Why am I doing this?
Competing with the government. You shouldn't be.
Great point. And the reason I'm bringing this up is this is the view from the inside about what somebody might seem obviously something to do from the outside, right? Now, oftentimes when we look at organizations, we see them as agents of change. What is a government? Government is for the service of the people. What is a corporate? It is a responsible entity, right? But an organization has 4 levels. The organization is an agent of change. The organization is a financial institution. The organization has compliance norms. The organization consists of people. And the CEO is actually, as they say in Mahabharata, the Dharma Sankata of the CEO is to manage these various interests in making that happen, right? And as you said, values drive it, but sometimes there are no easy answers. Like in most of these cases, and I'll tell you, the reality is 99% of the time the CEO won't do this. Because it's not something they have to do, and the risks are far outweighing the value. The value is that my employees will be engaged, my brand will be better, my social impact will be created. That's what they're thinking. Risk is that I'll get bad press, I will get caught in something, I'll spend a lot of money, not get. And they're like, yeah, risk reward ratio. And logical idea has immense ecological, economic, social impact, but the CEO will not still be able to do. Right? I work in the government, for example. I go to the government with an idea that we have to set up a desk to just address urban planning queries for all districts and cities, because expertise is limited. All of you agree that expertise is limited. Let's assume we create a central expertise desk that can then be done so that everybody can ask questions and get answers. Sounds like a good idea, right? Now the first question, should states or cities pay for this or not? They should pay for this, because if they don't pay for it, they won't take it seriously. So there has to be some accounting mechanism in the government. Second question, what is the price discovery of that payment? Government should put some price. How do they define the price? Government has no system for price discovery because it's never been done before. Third question, we should bring in organizations to provide this expertise. We don't have to have people in the government. Let's bring CEPT University, let's bring WRI, how do you contract? Let's say that we say nomination basis. We will we'll nominate CEPT University. Tomorrow there will be an RTI. आपने CEPT University को क्यों nominate किया? Now again I'm sitting as an additional secretary in the office. I'm thinking, कैसे करें हम? Very good idea, right? That is the problem. This piece is where it all gets stuck, right? Now from the outside, what we do is we judge. Our judgment is then what? एक corporate को कुछ नहीं करना, बेकार है. बात करते हैं. I'm sure they're also releasing water into that lake, which is polluted. And look at this, they'll benefit from the real estate improvement in price, but they won't do anything about the lake. We'll go to the government and say, government doesn't want to provide only any facility, right? But because the problem is in the constraints of the system, right? I'm going back to what I said earlier, that everybody should participate. That is the approach. But the challenge is really this, that the constraints of the system are things that we don't understand from the other side, right? So which means that we have a lot of ideas on the top. They have to come down. But essentially, and there is good intent in the bottom, but very, very few people understand the constraints within the system, right? Just to make it more tangible, this is actually the decision-making framework for a company on impact, right? I know it's a very crowded slide, so I'll talk through this. When a company starts to look at, should I invest in impact, they're saying, is it a thematic area I'm interested in? Is it a geography I'm interested in? Is this related to my business? Is it related to my stakeholders? Now, if it's, let's say, geography, am I working in that area where this is something that is need-based? Is this where my offices are? Is this something the government has said is an important geography, right? They are thinking, if this is related to my business, will it help my brand? Will it help my employees? Will it help my products and services, right? If it's related to my stakeholder, will it help me build better relations with government, with my customers and with my value chain, right? These are the questions that companies are asking, right? Now, when we see this diagram, what is our first impression? Sach Vadaao. Too many things. One is that, right? The second thing is, this is what the company wants. There is no focus on impact. Right? They should be focusing on, why are they focusing on all of these things, right? That is the problem, right? How many of you have heard this phrase, double handshake? Has anyone heard the word double handshake? No. Let's say she sells coffee. I go to her. I give her the money. She gives the coffee. She says thank you. I say thank you. Who did who a favor here? No one. Correct? Should I be thankful to her that she gave coffee? Should she be thankful to me because she gave me money? But when you come to think about impact or doing the right thing, you always believe that the other person should not expect anything in return, but do the right thing. Right? Why are you asking what the company will get out of this? You should just do the right thing. So it's a single handshake. And the problem often is designing those dual handshake models. When we go to companies, we have the strong impression that, yaar, ye to choose lenge paisa. Kaise bhi choose lenge paisa in some say. So whenever they talk about value for them, we get very defensive. You're like, no. But the problem is, and this is what I was talking in the panel discussion when Bazaar was there, that a lot of times knowing how companies make decisions help us make them partners in the change we want to create. And the moment we keep our judgment back and say, what will work for you, appeal for you, and what is in the domain of morally right, ethically right thing to do, we are able to forge multiple partnerships in the way both businesses and communities can actually be part of the work we do. Yeah? So this framework is too many things, but the advantage of this too many things is there are so many ways to appeal to a company. I often tell this to people who work in disability. It's one of those areas where money is very limited. There are no large organizations, and every time when people go to disability, their first question is, do you focus on disability? The guy says, no. I said, sorry. And he walks away. But if you flip that around and say, do you have geographies where you work where people with disability exist? Of course they exist. Would you want to engage with them and get positive brand? Absolutely. Do you have products and services that disabled people use? Absolutely. Can I engage with them to make it more experience? Great. Do you have value chains in which people with disability, like you're a retail chain, you run a coffee shop, can there be people who are, let's say, visually challenged or, auditorily challenged? Can they be part of the system? Can I train them? Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
How would we sell ourselves?
I love how you get free consulting now.
Double handshake.
Double handshake. So, and again, take the same argument, and first is a thematic area, right? And thematic area, by the way, is not just architecture. So, it's not like you don't have to go to architecture firms. Anyone who calls themselves in the domain of design. I don't know if you know this, Titan runs one of the largest design competitions out of their CSR budget. So, as architecture and urban planning, you can go to them and say, hey, we are creating this physical space for design. Will this be of something where you want to put your brand in? Anyone who's in the construction business, anyone who's in the architecture business, anyone who's in the business of driving higher quality of life, right? Look at all of those organizations and map them saying, okay, it's not just people I know socially, it is anyone who's interested in the broader agenda that CEPT University stands for. By the way, Pune receives as much CSR money as all the 7 northeastern states combined. Urban spend of CSR is far higher than urban spend in rural. Rajasthan, Gujarat and Maharashtra get 27% of all the CSR money in the country. 3 states. The next set is Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, the next set is North, then Central, then East. So, anyone who cares about the city, the state, is actually a potential person you can start talking to, right? Saying, are you in that city, right? Do you work in that city where people will benefit from it? Is there a priority geography for you from an organization point of view? All of this is actually relevant. From a business point of view, multiple things, right? Are you even hiring people of this type of talent? Can you be a part of this conversation, right? Do you have, like you talked about this whole air conditioning system, Are you in the vicinity of this space as to how you want to create? Is there a way you can accentuate your brand by being part of the academic institution today? And similarly, is this a way for you to strengthen the ability of your stakeholder ecosystem? You might not be working with these stakeholders, but if your stakeholders are working here by committing to this, are you building stronger relationships with them, right? Cisco works in the space of education because their networking equipment helps government deliver better education, right? Now, Cisco doesn't worry about education, but government worries about education. Their networking equipment helps and they strengthen the relationship with the government, right? Great strategic objective. So, what are ways in which, if you take the academic intent, diversify the list of thematic areas that you're working in, look at all the people who are interested in geography, given Gujarat gets, only next to Maharashtra gets a large amount of money. Look at all the businesses that might be interested in and say that this is a great way for me to embed my talent. And I think one of the things that, Bazaar, to build on your question, for raising money, social capital is a direct contributor to economic health, which is that you ask for money from a company is one thing, but are there ways in which you can create a set of companies to be interested in what CEPT University does? Sooner or later, they will open their wallets because the social capital around CEPT University becomes higher. But to build social capital, you come back to again this. What are ways in which they can contribute? Because it can't be a random stranger coming in. You have to create an opportunity. And with every organization that raises money, I always tell them, first build social capital, then financial capital. And social capital becomes extremely important. And then there are different types of money, by the way. There is CSR money, which is grant, which is where the company really spends the least amount of time deciding what they have to do. Then there is marketing money, which is bigger than the CSR money. They'll have to spend a little bit more time. Then there is responsible stewardship money, which is that I have to be seen as the right person. Scope 3 emissions. For example, all of the work that you're doing about reducing emissions, energy efficiency, you can get people to fund that innovation as part of their responsible stewardship business because they believe this is critical. And finally, business innovation. Is there a way we contribute to the innovation in the business because that's the largest chunk of money? And I think knowing what their motivations are, what part of money is important. And this is the example of the hourglass constraint system. Like this is the logic of the hourglass, right? Like this is the narrow spindle. Because people who are on the top don't know that companies make decisions like this, they throw darts at the company, hoping that something will stick. Right? But companies are actually having the system and saying, okay, now you tell me where I fit this. And they are waiting for a good idea to come. And I can tell you the number of times like companies are waiting to sign big checks and don't get an idea that's worth a big check. Right? Yesterday I was in a meeting, I had a lunch meeting with the board of a large organization. They're willing to sign 100 crores over the next 10 years on a problem. And the problem is, what is that idea that can absorb so much capital? It is true. They're actually worrying, can I actually spend this if I put 100 crores? Are you sure I can spend this? Will it have sufficient scale? And I had to convince them that this problem has sufficient scale. Right? And this happens not once, not twice, by the way. It happens a lot of times. Lot of donor money goes unspent because ideas worth large capital are actually fewer. All of us think it's easier to get less money. It's actually easier to get more money. It's counterintuitive. Right? So, if I've said all of this, right? All of this seems like Gyan. What should you do? What is in it, as at least the people in the back and some people in the front, you're all going to be professionals. What is that mindset or what is that call for action for all of you? The answer really is, how can you build an orchestrator mindset? Right? The difference between a planner and an orchestrator is a planner just says, here is how things have to be done. An orchestrator is getting everybody to do what they love to do in a way that rings the same tone. You know, like an orchestrator can never convince a guy who's playing the violin to go play the keyboard or convince a guy who's playing the cello to say, no, you go and do this. They have to find the people who love what they do, but to be able to play in a tune where the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Genuinely, I do believe what cities need today are orchestrators. Somebody who knows what corporates want, bring them in. Who knows what governments can do, bring them in. who knows how to create movements in communities, bring them in, and going back to, I think, the point he made, build institutions that are independent of people to be able to make this happen. The problem is we still have the hero syndrome a lot, right? We love to be the individual who's doing this. The best, and coming back and closing it with this line, the best form of leadership is invisible leadership. What cities actually need is invisible leadership. Because the problem with the powerful person on the top is that mortality is a real risk. We just somehow believe nobody's going to die, right? And when systems are built around individual people, when that person goes, what follows is a much diminished version of a similar person running a system that has no institutions, right? There's a great book called The Caged Tiger, where one of my friends actually wrote that book, Rathish Balakrishnan. He argues that the strength of the democracy is the strength of the institution. The strength of any system is the strength of the institution. But the point I'm making is, as you are understanding cities and design and spatials and materials and technical aspects, do spend the time understanding stakeholders.
I want to ask one question regarding this. Like, there are certain movements where we see champions of change. Like when it comes to, let's say, currently we are working on open water systems and we need that. So, taking the case of Singapore, we see the Prime Minister being the champion there. Certain times you have like mayor, or sometimes you have an intellectual being the champion. So then, if you don't build that kind of leadership revolving around that single person thing, so is there another way in a society which is not completely equivalent, but maybe not having an understanding about it? Then how do we view that kind of a system? Because even when we see the independence movement, we see things happening around certain leaders. So then how do we make a system then in that manner?
Great question. So, I'm going to say something very provocative, right, and political. Who's the most effective Prime Minister India has ever had? Right? In the pantheon of big leaders, right, by personality power, he's not even in the top 3 of them. You have to go to PM Sangrahalaya, right? They have these corridors and corridors about Prime Ministers. PM Narasimha Rao has probably a very weak pavilion, right? Nehru has like an entire building for himself. No, I'll come to you. The point is, I'm not trying to glorify Narasimha Rao, but the point I'm making is that leadership is a catalyst, which is that it gets people to come together in a common agenda, right? But leadership has a certain time horizon till which it is active, right? And then the person will die or the moment will change, right? Winston Churchill won the World War for Britain. He lost the next election, by the way, right? But for that time, he was a very important leader. But what great leaders realize is paving it backwards when the moment comes to set up an institution is very, very important, right? So that moment will need a catalyst. But once that moment is over, are you building an institution to pave it backwards to be able to do this is important. And I'll tell you why it is important, right? It is important because every system has inherent tensions, and the best way systems work is where those tensions are held and not resolved, right? Which means that you have to have enough people who sort of hold the different tensions so that we go in the middle rather than take one path and take that path. Because any path that you take has its own pitfalls, right? Every well-performing Southeast Asian country today, at the time of its hypergrowth, was a dictatorship or an authoritarian government. But everyone was smart enough to say once they got to a certain extent, they just became proper democracy. Because you can't continue, right? Because the tensions in the system have to be held in a way that ensures that resolution actually happens, right? And institutions hold tensions, right? And a lot of times, if you look back at what we did 47, 52 to beyond, we resolved tensions in a certain way which took the country in a certain direction, right? And I think that's an important question that we have to talk about in current space, right? Which is, I'll just finish that. So which is that leaders are very critical, by the way, because leaders are catalysts. And leaders have to know that we're creating a moment where they create enough opportunity to build an institution that then can subsequently, because mortality of an individual is much higher risk than a mortality of an institution.
We spoke at length about the leader. Expand on who is the orchestrator? Give us an idea.
So I'll take a real life example. I'm actually working on a project where we are working with an organization to say we have to create what I discussed earlier, thriving cities. Cities that we are saying are nature positive, right? Because when you say thriving, the economic narrative takes on so much stronger. Let's say nature positive cities. And one of the things that we realized is that a nature positive city has to work at 4 levels, right? At the first level, there has to be at the national level some decisions to be made around setting the intent, creating the policy, all of that stuff. At a state and a city level, we have to build administrative capacity, plans, etc. At a ward level, and then at a community level, where at a community level there are multiple neighborhoods where individual action is taken, not driven, taken on its own, right? Where people are taking ownership of what they can actually do, right? At a ward level, there is leadership that we are building to be able to administratively manage this. There's a lot of work to be done, right? Now, who does this? One way to think about it is that we'll create a central program with an apex leadership and they will direct people to do this, right? That is a visible form of leadership. The invisible form of leadership is how do we know who are all the people that are required to make this happen, and how do we, for their own incentive, get them to do things that will help us get to that final level of building a thriving city. How do we talk to media about building a narrative around a thriving nature positive city? How do we get neighborhoods to take ownership for their respective parts to say, can you do a challenge around the areas that you would? How do you get young people to do what they have to do? How do you get governments to signal that this is important? How do you get budget allocations to be done? And in all of these cases, it has to be aligned to their incentive as a person. And nobody will know who that person is, by the way. Like if you ask who made this happen, everybody will sort of either take credit or say, nahi, ho gaya bas. But that is an example of an orchestrator. And for being that orchestrator, what will move a neighborhood group? What will move a ward committee? What will move a city administration? What will move a national administration? What will move businesses to participate in this is something that you have to understand. Which is why I was sharing this point that the urban planners of tomorrow have to become orchestrators where they understand how a city should be designed, where they understand the stakeholder interests and ways in which you can orchestrate people to act. Now, you might not be the face of the campaign. You might even call somebody else and make them the face of the campaign, because that's just Amitabh Bachchan will come and tell everybody will listen, right? But Amitabh Bachchan doesn't have to do orchestration. He just has to be the face, right? But that's the example. Invisible hand is slightly different, but it is a very important idea. But I don't know how many of them have heard of the invisible hand today. How many of you have heard of the invisible hand? Okay, most of you have heard of the invisible hand. Invisible hand is essentially how the market or systems regulate themselves, right? When the quality goes up, demand goes up. And so nobody has to fix a price. The worst thing to do in any system is to fix the price of anything. Because it is true. Economics 101, don't fix the price of anything because you're skewing the invisible hand of the markets, right? But the more important thing is invisible leadership, which is I can get you to do something that you believe is your idea and you feel good about that idea and you feel good about the returns you get in that idea, but I just planted that idea for you and you are working entirely on your self-interest. I'm not coercing you to make that happen. I'm not telling you that this is what has to be done, but I'm finding a way to unlock that goodness, human potential in you to make that happen.
I think the credibility of the results, like when we have this kind of system and then you distribute power to, let's say, subsidiaries or partners, maybe better not call them subsidiaries. So partners, so then they are the one who are credible for giving the results, or the one who is actually orchestrating is credible enough to give the results. So then how do I actually pinpoint, hey, here is the problem?
See, closed system. You're saying, who are you reporting to? What is your accountability? Then you'll set up a governance system and say, but in an open system, like I said, let's say you go to a bazaar, right? And everybody is selling. Who's holding anyone accountable there? Are you holding them accountable that your tomatoes are good quality? Are you holding them accountable that the pricing is the right one? Are you holding accountable that the sheet is there? They are all working in their self-interest and ensuring that if I get good tomatoes, I'll get better price. If my price is too high, they'll go to another shop. Trusting the system's ability to self-regulate itself, very, very important. Because again, this is the question that you asked, and I'm glad you asked because a lot of them are thinking of the same thing. Because we believe control systems are better. Somebody is watching. The panopticon, right? I'm watching you, so you'll all do the right thing. It doesn't work, right? And that, I think, is at the fundamental level, the design principle, which is we create the right incentives and people participate in making that. Yeah? Yeah. I can keep going, by the way, but yeah.
So, one last thing. So, one, at least in the society, we see there is this question is there are people who are doing their work and policy. And these people are having substance, but they are doing it because they want to complete the work. I think this tendency is constantly at play with how we do that.
No, I agree. And I mean, what you said about well-intentioned people either grabbing power or directing things the wrong way is actually one of the greatest risks in any society. And this goes back to here, right? Like a well-intentioned person comes here and then drives it. Again, the question is, what institutions ensure that this one well-intentioned person does not have infinite authority to move the system and derail the system in a wrong way? And that you're able to hold them back and say, now, this is what has to happen. And that is also why institutions are important. Because you can never trust anyone, right? It is just the way systems work that you tip constantly. Like I'm a founder of an organization. The number of times I'm consciously aware that my signaling is very powerful in the small organization that I run. We have 500 people. But if I say something today, it will get, and then I can get caught in the narrative of I'm doing the right thing. Hence, I need an institution that calls me out and says, that was the wrong move. Pull this back. When the institution weakens, the risk of what you talked about becomes even more important.
We like to have you, generally we have architects, planners, etc. who come in and talk to us. Not always, but mostly. So we like a view from the outside. So this view of looking at it from a very different perspective is very important for us. For the students, yes, but also for our faculty. Because I think we do need to understand how the systems work. And in our teaching, in our work that we do in studios, these are the kind of concepts that we have to learn first, and we have to then start making sure that these are being taught in the right way. So thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Woke up at 3 o'clock this morning. I'm very thankful to you. So thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.